than supplements.
What do you do in those cases? Because a lot of people that have messaged me speak to exactly what you've described there.
Yeah. So we would go back and actually figure out, again, is this behavioral? So are you doing the, no offense, the idiot proof stuff? Mm-hmm. Like, are you drinking? Are you like doing all those things? So a lot of times it is simple as that. A lot of the times you don't need to spend $1 on any assessment. It is really, truly do the stuff people have told you 100 times to stop doing.
I mean, on the psychological point.
Yeah.
If it's just an anxiety reaction.
Well, I started there for a reason because that can be causing it.
Okay.
So it is an actual sleep problem you're having because of your behaviors.
Right.
Okay. Now, let's say it's not all those things. Remember earlier when I said your body's superpower is adapting and responding, right? That's exactly what's happening. If you get into bed and you learn a pattern of continuing to lay there and stay awake or wake up in certain hours, that pattern will be recognized and that pattern will be repeated. You have to break that pattern. So how do you do it? This is not very common, but I'll give you like an extreme example, okay? There's a thing called sleep restriction training, okay? It's very effective, but it is brutal. We don't go to it often, one more time, but we have gone to it. I have used it. It can be successful. This is the same for people who wake up after a few hours or struggle to fall asleep. So what you do is, let's say you want to get up at, we'll make the math easy here, 5 o'clock in the morning. Okay, great. And you typically get in bed at 10 and you lay there and you're kind of up all night and you have all these sleep issues, all right? And then you wake up at 5, you're exhausted. So then you have to have caffeine all day and then you're up from your caffeine. So then you have to have melatonin, right? I can't tell you how many times we've looked at people's next morning melatonin concentrations and seen them 20, 30, or 40 times higher than the upper limit on the reference range value. So then what happens when you're walking around with extreme amounts of melatonin the next day? Like you're sedated. Great. So how do you break this cycle? Well, one of the ones is you stop those habits, like not that much caffeine that late, and then you stop the melatonin. Okay. I don't like melatonin like at all very much for almost anything. But we're going to set the clock and you're going to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I don't care what happens. You're waking up at 5 in the morning, period. And we're not even going to get into bed until 11:59. So you're going to have 5 hours of sleep at most. And you know what happens night one? You lay there and you don't fall asleep because you're in that pattern, right? And you're also staring at the clock knowing I have to get up at 5. And you're laying there worrying and thinking about how you're not sleeping, and it is brutal. And you're going to have a couple of hours of sleep and you're going to wake up at 5. And you're going to get up at 5 every single day, period. No sleeping in on weekends, okay? You're also going to not get into bed, no matter how tired you are. You're not getting into bed until 11:59. You do that for a week. What will happen very quickly is your body will start to realize a new pattern of, yo, the second she lets us lay down, you better fall asleep. And you better not mess around during those 5 hours because we're not getting any naps, we're not getting anything else, right? You will start to fall asleep quickly and you will jump right into deep sleep and you'll go through a pretty compressed but a proper sleep architecture. Every week then, you add back 10 to 15 minutes. So next week you go to bed at 11:45. And you know what happens next week when you get into bed at 11:45? You lay around trying to fall asleep? No chance, right? Because now you've got a week with pretty gnarly sleep restriction. You fall asleep immediately. 10 or 15 minutes a week after that. And so what you end up doing is you backfill until you get back up to your 8 or 8.5 hours. But the pattern you're learning the entire time is when I go to sleep, I fall asleep and I do not wake up until that next time. So you stop the overnight wakings, you stop the struggling to fall asleep. It takes a couple of months, clearly, and it is brutal, but it is very, very effective.
How effective from your research?
We've never had a problem with somebody it not working.
Really?
Putting it that way. Now, again, we don't use it very often.
Yeah.
You don't need to.
Yeah.
You can do a subtler version of those things. So I want to acknowledge that as an extreme sort of thing. And I don't recommend doing it, especially if you have legitimate health concerns, like you want to have an MD or walk through that, something like that on you. You can do it on a more condensed scale though. If you're laying there struggling to fall asleep, almost every sleep scientist is going to tell you get out of bed. Because you don't want to set that pattern of like every night I toss and turn for an hour and a half. That's a problem, right? And so you want to break out of that pattern one way or the other to not to set up that routine. And the same thing would be, this is why it's important to not do things first thing in the morning that are deleterious to sleep. So rolling over, waking up, and immediately turning the TV on or immediately looking at social media, because your body will anticipate that response. It will then start a cascade prior to that that kicks you up and starts waking you up earlier and earlier every morning because it knows that stimulation is coming at 6 a.m. And so instead of you waking up at 6 a.m. with your alarm and then checking your phone, your body starts to wake you up at 5:45, 5:30, 5:15, because it just knows that thing is coming at 6. And so making sure that your morning is not jump started in that direction, that it really does wake up appropriately, is really important to those that like wake up super early and they just can't get back to sleep.